Hey, we're back with the Federalist, giving you a preview of the RNC and answering the age-old questions of, will sucking on charcoal get you out of a DUI?
Yeah, Chris...
I'm Chris Bedford, senior editor with the Federalist, and this is Emily Jasinski.
Chris is peddling junk science.
I never tried it. I drinking and driving I've never tried, so I have no idea. My mind is so pure.
You're a good man, Chris Bedford.
But tonight, night three.
Night
the
three.
Real questions.
So tonight is Mike Pence's night. It's also Karen Pence's night. Karen Pence is going to be speaking. Marsha Blackburn, Joni Ernst, Kristi Noem, who I think has a particularly interesting story to tell.
Well, she's someone who is below a lot of radars, except for liberal radars, where they're constantly attacking her. And she's a real potential leader. She's a true believer, and she's the only governor in the United States who, when people said in New York City, you need to lock down the entire country and destroy the middle class and your economy, or Andrew Cuomo is going to kill the elderly. She said, one, I mean, maybe there's science behind that, but two, I don't have the power to do that.
Yeah.
I'm a constitutional official elected governor. I can't just tell you to stay at home, but I can advise you to. And South Dakota is an absolute success story, like Sweden, on how to get through coronavirus, whereas most of the country is not.
Well, Chris, you actually went through South Dakota when a lot of these decisions were being made, or did you go near South Dakota?
All through South Dakota.
All through South Dakota.
I spent 3 nights in South Dakota.
On a reporting trip.
Yeah, on a reporting trip. We almost spent 4 nights because it was such a nice city, such a nice state. One night out by Mount Rushmore, we drove across the entirety of Wyoming that day, which is, it's funny when you drive through the entire country, the places you think are mountainous are flat, and the places you think are flat are mountainous. It's exactly the opposite of what I assumed was growing up in Massachusetts.
I was going to say, Chris is not from the middle of the country, so it's funny when you drive through the country.
Yeah, you know those tiny little states tucked in the corners of America.
Where is South Dakota?
I have been there. It is east of Wyoming and south of North Dakota.
Perfect. Well, what was your impression of the state and of Noem's leadership as somebody who was reporting on the coronavirus pandemic while these decisions were being made, and while New York was, telling everyone else that they needed to lock down completely after sort of failing to do it themselves?
Yeah, and South Dakota was particularly targeted because
yes.
It was a meatpacking plant where there was a massive outbreak. Hundreds and hundreds of people in this meatpacking plant in Sioux Falls got coronavirus. The media was reporting on this, saying she had killed them by not locking down. Forget about the fact that this would have been essential workers anyways. And if you went back, it was 2 deaths, but that was not reported on. So they went at her hard. South Dakota, she advised, when the president said 15 days to flatten the curve, people did that. They went in and most businesses shut down. Very few places were open. In the Capitol, for example, I went to one of the rare restaurants that was open. They had to let their employees go on public benefits while the family worked it, and because you weren't able to make the tip money. And the truckers were very grateful because it was the only meal they'd had outside of a gas station for many nights. However, when that was over, there was no government order to shut down anything. You could stay at home or you didn't have to. The bars were open again. The restaurants were open again. People were out. People were hugging and shaking hands. I didn't see a mask outside of a clerk's, and you wear a mask when you walk into somebody's convenience store if they're dealing with 1,000 people a day. Out of show of respect, it was very different, and it's not at all what you imagined. It is not at all what was going on through the rest of the country at that moment, because we continued to drive. But she's one of the speakers tonight.
She's a great speaker. If you watched her address on July 3rd at Mount Rushmore, it was fantastic.
Covered that for the Federalist, so we're covering tonight as well.
Yeah.
I'm interested to hear from Mike Pence. Now, I know that Vice President Mike Pence is a politician, which is generally among the more boring speeches that you're going to get.
Absolutely. From
any of these conventions. The real people, you're not going to top a lobsterman like we saw last night.
You have a weird obsession with this lobsterman who
because
you do not know.
I've never met him.
You just love him from a distance.
I know those folks. I know those people, and I love them. And I've never seen one on the national stage before. Mike Pence is going to be at Fort McHenry in Baltimore, which may not be a name that slips right off the tongue.
Canceled.
But Fort Henry, the British tried to cancel it in 1812 when they shelled it all night. And then the completely canceled songwriter Francis Scott Key, who was a prisoner on one of those British ships, wrote the song "The Star Spangled Banner,"
Canceled.
which is canceled.
We need a button. Canceled.
Which is our national anthem.
Canceled.
Yeah, it's canceled. And the founder of the NFL. This is a place that's historic in America. Baltimore is a city that's been a scene of a lot of conflict. It's got a troubled recent history. A couple really wonderful renaissances. Go to Baltimore, it's great. But keeps on sending itself back like its own worst enemy. And I'm interested to see what the vice president does playing off of Baltimore, where we've seen riots, we've seen violence, we've seen setbacks. We've also seen American ingenuity, American entrepreneurship, people, the rich not leaving Baltimore but pouring their money back into it, like with Under Armour. And I'm hoping that he ties all of those themes together for tonight.
Well, so that's what could make a Mike Pence speech compelling. I think he'll probably also talk about... So Mike Pence is an interesting person in this administration because this has been the culture war convention. It has been the Republican Party's coming out show, basically saying it's time for us to...
Coming out for the culture war!
Coming out for the culture war! And that is going to be the title of the documentary that I make of it. Anyway, but that's really been what this is. And Mike Pence is somebody who's a social conservative, a religious conservative, and he aligned himself with Playboy cover star Donald Trump. And that was a controversial decision about 5 years ago. If you can remember that far back, I prefer not to.
No one can. No one can remember. We live in the eternity of the now.
Yeah, no, all of it blends together. But
it's unprecedented.
So Mike Pence speaking at this particular convention, I think we can expect some notes of the culture war in his speech. I also, to pivot...
Really, though? Because normally at the RNC, he'd be the culture warrior. But Mike Pence is not the kind of guy who's going to go beyond what we saw last night, which is a visual and sensual description, like using multiple senses, sensualized description of abortion.
Right.
And a woman talking about how little girls are being threatened by adult mentally ill men who are allowed into their bathrooms.
Oh, Mike Pence is not going to talk about that.
He's not going to talk. I mean,
we've
seen the Third Crusade on camera last night. I mean, this is kind of going to be like a 10th Awakening. Like, it's kind of cool, but it's not a crusade.
No, it's not. Yeah, okay. But I think you can expect some notes of that. I do think Joni Ernst is speaking, Kristi Noem is speaking, and Karen Pence is speaking. Some really high profile, I think compelling female Republican speakers.
Larry Trump.
Right, there you go. And Joni Ernst has been telling a story, interestingly, about her abuse that she says she's suffered at the hands of her husband and her ex-husband and previous boyfriend. I wonder if Joni Ernst is going to speak to women as, be a sort of defender of Donald Trump as a woman who has gone through a lot of tough times. That
would be an interesting angle to bring, and we've seen that so far.
But that's why they use people like Joni Ernst.
Yeah, and at least, I mean, most politicians are, as we've said, canned, boring. Like, could you please at least read the speech a few times so I believe that it's coming from you as opposed to just reading it?
Did you ever read it before you're reading it now?
So disappointing, Nikki Haley.
Oh my gosh.
But what's been amazing to see all the regular, everyday Joes and the activists who reluctant activists who didn't want to be activists.
The McCloskeys.
Yeah, to come out and hear their stories. Because what they usually have is some horrible trauma.
Yes.
That they've experienced in their life, like with Mr. Pollock, and who lost his wife Meadow at the Parkland shooting. And
his daughter.
His daughter Meadow. And they bring this trauma in and this horrible low point, and the audience is immediately grabbed. And then they filter it through, well, here's how I got better, here's where I met Donald Trump, or along the way, and here's what's happening now, and this is why it matters to me, and here's the policy, and here's what I'm going forward. I'm not sure if we're going to get that from any of the political figures, but if we get anything like that, and I know Donald Trump is not a savior of Joni Ernst, but if we get anything like that, it'd be a moving moment.
Well, and that's really what I'm looking for, and in terms of what in the context of this culture war convention, we might hear from particularly some of these women speakers. Eric Trump, actually, something in his speech that was interesting.
He gave a good speech.
He talked about cancel culture. Now, that's fascinating, really, because at a political convention for the offspring of the president to come in and not give a canned sort of taxes and I love my dad. I mean, there was some of that. But he also was talking about cancel culture, and Don Jr. talked about cancel culture.
Because they're gonna get canceled.
They're canceled.
They're canceled. I mean, it's actually kind of believable that Tiffany Trump is having difficulty finding a job because her name is Tiffany Trump.
Yeah.
The only time in history.
And yet, I imagine some people on K Street would be very eager to hire somebody with that last name.
Oh, they used to be, but even now, I mean, it's difficult to find a job as a former administration official if you were good at your job. If you write an op-ed that says Donald Trump was the worst boss I ever had, you can go work for Google. I mean, you'll be fine. But yeah, if you didn't, then you're canceled.
Yeah, but you're also still one of the few access points to the administration. But no, I don't think Tiffany Trump's going to go lobby.
No, I don't think so either. And the administration right now is fighting for its life, so we'll see how long that job lasts.
That's very true. Yeah, so that's my general outlook on this. Is I think it's fascinating to hear talk of cancel culture in the political arena, because that's something that typically culture critics like us would have these like conversations about, and you never really saw politicians have an appetite to address them because I don't think they understand that it was actually, they never understood that was a kitchen table issue. They never understood that what people are really disturbed by is so many of these like things that are just not what people in Washington think about all of the time, but they're really what the average person thinks about all the time, because guess what? If something weird is going on at their kid's school, if there's some terrible piece of curriculum, they don't want to stand up at the PTA meeting because they don't want to lose their job. And they don't want to be ostracized by all of the other parents, and they don't want to be called a bigot. And so to hear a political party standing up against that, I think Republicans are really onto something, and I do think that we're going to continue hearing that tonight. Chrissy Noem could even talk about that.
And, it's always been kind of a kitchen table issue, to your point.
Yes,
I mean, you write, what's the song, Harper's County PTA?
Harper's
is
County.
An absolute hit.
Jeannie C. Riley, Harper Valley PTA.
50 years ago, it was an absolute major hit about dealing with your PTA and getting canceled in your hometown. I mean, small towns can be, it stinks to get canceled on the national stage, but you can get canceled in your small town.
But now when Harper Valley PTA came out, that song was The Day My Mama Socked It to the Harper Valley PTA.
Harper Valley, yes, that's what it is.
But nobody has that will to sock it to the PTA anymore.
Well, because cell phone cameras have made crime so much more difficult, unless you're, peacefully protesting.
Yeah.
Then you can do whatever you want.
Then you're fine.
Except in parts of Wisconsin.
Yes. Well, so we should talk about that to sort of bring things full circle. We've been talking about the split screen in our coverage all week that the Democrats completely ignored, even though they had a convention that was very much targeted at swing state Rust Belt voters. In fact, the exact kind of voters that populate the city of Kenosha, Wisconsin, not far where I grew up, and it's a district that went for Barack Obama, it's a district that then went for Mitt Romney, and it's a district that went big for Donald Trump.
And it's a district that was represented by Paul Ryan.
Paul Ryan's district.
And it's a district that you pointed out yesterday was devastated by the trade agreements.
They lost a lot of manufacturing jobs, particularly to Mexico, in the years since 2000.
But didn't they get to train their replacements? I mean, wasn't it wonderful?
Yeah, right. That's exciting.
And they can get a job, coding. They can learn to code.
Right. But this is like a great example of how stunning the Democrats they didn't even nod towards it. They did not address it in any subtle fashion or overt fashion. They completely ignored it, and probably at their peril.
It was a complete disaster, like Ben and I were talking about in the podcast we recorded today. Complete disaster for them to do that. It's going to take a lot of work for them to rebound from that, because right now, unlike in the major cities, in Washington, D.C. yesterday, footage came out of a woman by herself, and then a young couple or two friends who were out to date, a boy and a girl out getting it screamed at in their faces by mobs demanding they put up their fist at a black power symbol, which I will absolutely never do.
A literal mob. Like, if you look at the video, it's a mob of a huge number of people ganging up, like, demanding people who are eating outside at a restaurant in Adams Morgan raise
put their fist up, you know, like the Olympics photograph.
Right, and these two people who were dining quietly outdoors, totally ambushed, just were sitting there quietly and not because they had chosen not to do it. They were just attacked.
And then in a more sad and violent turn, we saw that in Wisconsin with people from nearby, people from neighboring states saying, the police won't do their job, citizens will defend this property. And they put themselves in harm's way. They understood that they were putting themselves in harm's way, and they were attacked by lunatics. And sadly, people were killed because of that.
Some of them seem to also have been lunatics that, and we don't know. Like, we don't actually know what happened. And I think in all of these situations, it's always best to reserve judgment until the facts come out. But what we saw was a mixture, like I look at the area of Kenosha as like a cultural tinderbox because of what's happened. I mean, I've been doing research into this, some research showing mental illness and suicide, all of family violence have been on the rise, and that's of course something you would naturally expect when jobs leave. Or when quality jobs leave.
Alcoholism rises, spousal abuse, child abuse. Sad.
Right, and these are the conditions that are exacerbated by the pandemic, which wrecks the economy and keeps people isolated
the government's
from each other.
response to the pandemic.
Right, yes. That keeps people isolated
We're fluid destroying Kenosha, the governor is.
Yeah. And so what we saw was just a lot of, I think, cultural angst that exploded, and it was a nasty, nasty scene, and it shows literally no signs.
And it's going to show, the overall absolute true, regardless of what happened last night, message we can draw is that when the police decide that they will not defend American citizens and their homes and their businesses and their persons, then we will defend ourselves. Absolutely.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
And people were killed last night, and that's going to happen unless the police step in and put an end to mob violence.
Right, and you know, now that I'm thinking about it, I was on Mornings with Maria this morning, and the McCloskeys were one of Maria's guests, and it's an interesting progression from what happened.
Why were they ever in that position?
Right, that's an interesting progression from St. Louis to Kenosha. And it's like this has been a slow-moving disaster that we could see coming. The trajectory of it has been completely clear. What is anybody doing about it? These Democratic governors are refusing extra National Guard help. They want none of it, basically. Even if they accept a little bit, they seem to want none of it.
Your whiny, pathetic adult governor. I was so shocked at the DNC about what a simpering, thin-chested person he was. But no kidding, he doesn't want to put down rioters, but you know what? He's going to have to, and now he's probably going to send in National Guard, because otherwise you're going to end up with violence on your hands in your streets, like real violence, not one-sided violence, because this is no longer in a deeply blue city. Yeah. It's in Wisconsin. That's an armed state.
Well, and it doesn't matter if you are eating dinner in a deep blue city like Washington, D.C., and you refuse to put your hand up. Doesn't matter if you live in
Chances that kid agreed with their politics?
Probably
high. They're like, hi.
Yeah.
Oh, he didn't want to do that because he stood up for himself.
My favorite part is the camera panned over briefly to this, like...
The dude just sitting by himself was like, no one's bugging me. I'm going to go back to eating my hot brown and my mimosa. Are we good?
Yeah, but it does, like, now, this is, like... Maybe these are isolated incidents. I don't think they are, but the larger issue is that the threat is real. That when you're going about your everyday business, whether you are on your own property in a gated community and protesters break through the gate, like what happened with the McCloskeys, and then they get blasted all over the internet and turned into a meme in a matter of hours and become infamous, whether you are eating dinner at a restaurant outside of Washington,
grilling in your yard,
whether you happen to live in a suburb of Milwaukee that has never seen anything like this, it can explode overnight, and your business can get looted. A business that you spent your whole life building can get looted. Republicans, I think, frankly, actually need to talk more about this at the convention, and more specifically address this at the convention. Granted,
the head of the police union will be up there tonight,
there you go.
I'm hoping to see more of that Tom Cotton will be up there tonight.
The man who wrote the New York Times op-ed that got an editor fired, basically saying send the National Guard in.
Literally got the New York Times canceled. I mean, can you imagine if you're a comms guy writing for a senator, and the senator's like, all right, I need an op-ed that gets the head of the New York Times opinion section fired and goes viral.
That wouldn't have been the op-ed.
And you're the comms director. You're like, okay. And this is, by the way, like not an abnormal politician requests to their comms team. So the guy'd be like, okay, sure.
But that's the thing that was so ridiculous is that would not have been the op-ed I would write to get the New York Times editor fired.
Send in the troops.
Send in the troops. Well, the New York Times wrote that headline. That's not the headline Tom Cotton submitted. Mm-hmm. So the New York Times did it to itself. Mm-hmm. But anyway, this is what we can expect to see from the show tonight. It's going to be big. I do hope Republicans address what's happening in Kenosha more specifically, not because it's for the entertainment value or for the political strategery, but because we desperately need to hear what our politicians' plan of action is. And that's something that's important to people around the country so that these sorts of outbursts that burn millions of dollars in property and put so many people's lives in danger and send communities into a tailspin don't continue popping up in their hamlets.
Like if Bill Barr comes on there with a bunch of masked federal agents and they just parade the leaders of Antifa like they're drug lords.
And Bill Barr's got his bagpipes.
In Mexico, and he's just plays them on and plays them off. That'd be wonderful.
Yeah, and you know...
Throw Fauci in there.
No, throw Fauci. Why isn't Fauci speaking?
No. In the perp parade.
Yeah. Anyway, thanks so much for tuning in. We hope you've been enjoying our live coverage. You can comment, let us know what you'd like to see more of. Please make sure to subscribe and stay tuned for more. I'm Emily Jasinski. He's Chris Bedford.
And we'll see you tomorrow.